This is Velvet Hour, slow bedtime stories to help you drift off and sleep through the night. Tonight's story, Tea in a Nebula Cabin. You are already inside the cabin when you notice the kettle. It rests on the small round stove as if it has always belonged there, a blue enamel kettle with one pale chip near the spout. The handle is wrapped in a strip of dark cloth softened by many warm evenings. Even before the water begins to think about heating, there is a faint scent around it. Orange peel, a little cardamom, and the quiet sweetness of old steam linger in the metal. The ship drifts on without any hurry at all. Beyond the windows, the nebula moves in a way that almost does not seem like movement. Violet clouds pass first, then rose, then a muted silver that turns the glass into a dim mirror. The colors do not flash or change sharply. They bloom and thin, then bloom again, as if someone far away were stirring paint into milk. Inside the cabin, the only sound is the low hum beneath the floor. It is so steady that it soon feels less like a sound and more like the shape of the room itself. The cabin is small enough that nothing is ever out of reach for long. A narrow bunk sits against one wall with a folded blanket at the foot. A shelf above it holds 3 cups, a tin of tea, and a jar with a cork stopper. Near the window, a wooden chair is fixed to the floor, its arms polished smooth by long use. The air is warm in a patient way, not close, not heavy. It carries the resting fragrance of kettle metal and cardamom like a promise that has no need to be kept quickly. You move through this room as if you have all evening and more than all evening. Your hand passes over the back of the chair and then over the edge of the shelf. The wood is smooth and faintly dry under your fingers, with a tiny raised seam where 2 pieces meet. The tea tin waits beside the cups, round and dull silver, its lid marked with a crescent scratch. When you lift it and bring it near, the scent rises at once. Dried orange peel, warm cardamom, black leaves, and that deep, almost bread-like note that tea can hold when it has been stored well. There is no need to measure anything yet. The waiting is part of the evening, and the evening has stretched itself wide enough to contain every pause. The ship keeps drifting through violet light, and the windows make that light gentle before it enters. Rose color touches the rim of one cup and then slips away. The kettle sits still, holding cool water that will soon become fragrant air. Its chipped spout catches the dimness in a pale crescent. You begin to feel that this small flaw is part of the cabin's face, as familiar as the hum below your feet. A faint warmth rises from the stove, though it has only just been turned low. It smells of iron and old heat, and beneath that is the sweeter thread from the kettle, waiting to grow stronger. You set the tin down and listen to the room remain exactly as it is. Not silent because the hum continues. Not busy because nothing asks to be done all at once. Outside, a broad rose cloud gathers near the window and lingers there, softening the edges of every object in the cabin. It makes the blue enamel look almost purple for a little while. When you open the small jar with the cork stopper, another layer joins the air. It is sugar, but not plain sugar. A strip of orange rind has been left inside, and over time the crystals have taken on its scent. The smell is bright without being sharp, sweet without becoming loud. It sits beside the cardamom the way a warm lamp sits beside a darker corner. You close the jar again and place it near the cups. The evening now has shape, though almost nothing has happened. The ship does not rock. It does not sway or creak. It glides so evenly that the cup rims and shelf shadows stay where they are, and the only sign of motion is the nebula passing like colored weather beyond the glass. This steadiness makes every small scent easier to notice. Cardamom in the tin, orange in the sugar, the mild mineral smell of water inside enamel, a trace of wool from the folded blanket. Yet it is always the kettle that gathers them together. It holds the center of the room without asking for attention. You lift one cup from the shelf and then another, choosing between them, though either would do. One is cream-colored with a narrow blue line around the rim. The other is heavier, brown glazed with tiny darker specks sunk into the surface. You turn the brown one in your hands, and it smells faintly of tea leaf and old warmth, as if evenings have seeped into the clay over time. For no reason other than the calm pleasure of deciding, you set it on the table. Beside it, the spoon gives off the cool, clean scent of polished metal. The kettle waits with its little chipped mouth pointed toward the cup. Near the stove is a small drawer, and in it are folded cloths for handling hot things. When you slide the drawer open, a mild scent of soap and cotton rises. One cloth has a faded stripe the color of plum skin. You lay it beside the kettle, smoothing it once with your palm. That simple act seems to settle the room even more deeply. Some weights are made kinder by preparation, though they would be kind enough without it. The hum under the floor remains low and even, like breath in another room. The nebula outside has thinned into layers now. Pale violet drifts over rose, and behind both is a dim field of silver points, each one blurred by the soft cloud between ship and star. The glass carries a slight cool scent when you stand near it, not cold exactly, but clear. It is pleasant to stand there for a while and look without trying to follow anything. Then the warm fragrance from the tea tin reaches you again, and you turn back. The kettle seems closer than before, not because it moved, but because you have already been thinking of it. You spoon the dark leaves into a small mesh infuser and listen to the dry rustle they make. It is a tiny sound, softer than turning a page. The leaves release more fragrance as they meet the open air, and the cardamom comes forward now, full and rounded. Orange peel follows behind it, not bright like fresh fruit, but mellow, like peel dried on a windowsill. You place the infuser on the table and put the lid on the tin. The room is instantly more fragrant than it was a moment ago. Still, the kettle has not yet changed its voice. The stove warmth spreads into the blue enamel little by little. When you lift the lid to look, there is no steam yet, only the clean scent of warming water and metal. The inside of the lid is pearled with the first dampness. You close it again gently, and the handle settles back against its cloth wrapping. That cloth carries the faint smell of old heat and something almost smoky, though no smoke is ever seen. It is a comforting smell, as ordinary as a sleeve cuff warmed by sunlight. The chipped spout points toward the window where roselight has become softer and more gray. You sit for a while in the fixed chair, not fully facing the table and not fully facing the glass. From here, both can remain in sight without any effort. The chair has a low woven back, and the fibers smell faintly of clean straw and varnish. Every object in the cabin seems content to remain exactly where it is. The spoon catches a little nebula light. The sugar jar glows softly at its shoulder. The kettle darkens and brightens as the violet outside deepens, and its quiet scent grows by such slow degrees that you almost only notice it when you return to it after a pause. There is a narrow shelf beneath the window where small things have been placed over time. A compass with a brass edge rests there, though there is little need to steer. Beside it lies a square of folded paper tucked under a smooth stone, and near that a small ceramic dish holds 2 cloves and 1 star of anise. Their fragrance is slight from this distance, held close to the dish. They do not challenge the cardamom and orange around the kettle. They simply deepen the room by a thin shade. You leave them where they are and let the kettle remain the evening's center. From the bunk, the blanket gives off a wool smell warmed by the cabin air. It is not strong. It rises only when you pass close, as if the cloth were quietly remembering colder places. The pillow smells faintly of linen and the cedar board beneath it. Even these gentle notes seem to gather around the waiting kettle, not because the kettle overpowers them, but because the thought of tea makes every nearby scent seem to belong to one slow ritual. Outside, a broad wash of violet leans across the glass. It turns the blanket's cream color to lavender for a little while, then lets it go again. You rise and cross the short space to the stove. The lid is warm now under the cloth-wrapped handle. When you lift it, a first thread of steam slips up, almost invisible. It carries with it a sweetness from the metal and a softened version of the water's clean scent. Not yet enough for tea, not even close, but enough to mark the evening's slow progress. You set the lid down once more, and the kettle resumes its waiting. The low hum beneath the floor seems to welcome this tiny change and fold it into its constant note. At the edge of the table is a shallow wooden bowl with a single orange in it. The fruit has been there long enough that its peel has grown slightly matte, no longer glossy from freshness. When you turn it in your hand, the skin releases a little fragrance where your thumb presses lightly. It is bright but rounded, not sharp, and it answers the tea tin as if the two had already agreed on the evening. You do not peel it. There is no need. It is enough to hold it for a moment and set it back in the bowl. The kettle's chipped spout seems pleased to witness such small decisions. You open the cupboard under the shelf and find a small plate wrapped in cloth. When you uncover it, there are 2 plain biscuits, browned at the edges and carrying a mild scent of butter and flour. Their simplicity suits the room. Nothing here needs ornament to become pleasant. You place 1 biscuit beside the cup and leave the other on the plate. Warmth from the stove has reached this side of the cabin now, and the butter scent grows a little richer. It blends with cardamom and orange until the air feels almost like a memory of a kitchen, though the windows look on to drifting rose light instead of any earthbound night. The ship continues through the nebula with such ease that the colors outside seem less like scenery and more like weather passing over a calm sea. Soft violet thickens near the left window, rose thins toward silver near the right, and from time to time a dim blue appears, as deep as evening seen through thick glass. None of it hurries. None of it demands notice. You can look away for a long while and return to find only a gentle rearrangement. Inside, the kettle remains the one object whose change matters, and even that change is patient enough to feel kind. At last, the water within makes its first faint shift. It is not a whistle and not even a murmur. It is only a soft inward stirring, a small sound, like a thought beginning. The blue enamel holds it close. If you were not already listening for it, you might miss it entirely. Yet once heard, it gives the room a new depth, as if the warm air has suddenly gained another layer. Cardamom seems ready to rise. Orange waits near it. The spoon and cup, the cloth and sugar jar, all appear to lean inward by the smallest imaginable degree. You do not rush to pour. There is pleasure in letting the water come fully to itself. So you sit again and watch the nebula lay one pale rose band after another across the windows. The fixed chair creaks almost not at all when you settle into it, more a change of pressure than a sound. In your lap, your hands rest lightly, one over the other, while the room continues its careful work. The kettle's scent grows warmer. Metal, steam, cardamom lingering from past evenings, orange sweetness waiting in the tin. Each breath of the cabin air feels like turning toward a familiar voice. There is a small vent near the ceiling where the ship's air passes in a slow, invisible current. It carries no draft worth naming, only the faintest movement, enough to drift steam toward the table once it rises. At the moment, it brings the kettle's fragrance slightly across the cabin and then lets it settle again. The effect is so soft that you notice it more by smell than by skin. A warm thread of metal and old steam moves near the shelf, touches the tea tin, and returns. The room feels gently stitched together by that motion. One of the windows has a rounded corner where the glass has been replaced at some point, and around that edge the frame smells faintly of resin. It is an almost hidden scent, dry and amber-like, released by warmth over many evenings. When the rose light touches that corner, the resin note seems to deepen, and for a few moments it joins the cardamom in a quiet harmony. Then the color outside changes again, and the scent slips back into the wood. The kettle remains. Its blue enamel, its cloth-wrapped handle, its pale chipped spout. The whole evening can be felt there. You lift the sugar jar again and turn the cork between your fingers. It comes free with a small, soft release. The sugar within smells sweeter now that the cabin is warmer. The orange rind tucked among the crystals has darkened with time, becoming almost translucent at the edges. It has given itself steadily to the sugar, and now the sugar gives that fragrance back to the room in tiny, patient breaths. You leave the jar open for a little while. The kettle continues to gather heat. The low hum beneath everything remains smooth and rounded, never changing its pace. There is a notebook on the narrow shelf beside the bunk, its cover made of dark cloth rubbed lighter at the corners. When you pick it up and fan the pages, a paper scent rises, dry and comforting, with the slightest shadow of graphite. No need to read or write anything. The smell alone is enough, another quiet layer in the cabin's air. You set the notebook on the table, not to use, but simply to let it belong there for a while. Beside it, the cup waits. Beside the cup, the biscuit. And beyond them all, nearest the stove, the kettle warms the room by degrees too small to count. A broad fold of nebula passes close outside, brightening the cabin in mauve and pink. For a few moments, the glass looks as if it had been breathed on from the far side. The colors are rich but never intense, softened by distance and cloud. They reach the blue enamel of the kettle and make its chip look pearly white. They reach the sugar jar and tint the crystals with a blush that fades as soon as the cloud thins. You watch this without feeling the need to hold on to it. There will be another cloud, and then another. The kettle will keep warming in the meantime. When the water begins its second stage, you hear it immediately. The tiny inward stir becomes a delicate, almost secret simmering, not a bubbling that asks to be noticed, more like the sound of a sleeve brushing linen in the next room. Steam now rests under the lid, and when you lift it, the scent rises more clearly. Warm enamel, clean water turning tender at the edges, a memory of cardamom carried from old pourings. You lower the lid again and smile into the room, though there is no one here to see it and no need for anyone to see it. Now the tea can be measured properly. You open the tin once more, and this time the fragrance fills the whole small cabin in an instant. Cardamom leads, full and almost creamy. Orange peel follows, soft and rounded. The black tea beneath them grounds everything with its deep, leaf-dark warmth. You spoon the mixture into the infuser slowly, letting each small mound fall into place. The dry leaves brush the metal mesh with a papery whisper. By the time you close the lid of the tin, the air around the table feels complete, as if this scent had been waiting behind the room all along. You set the infuser into the brown cup and pause again. The cup's glaze reflects a dim oval of violet from the window. Its handle is slightly uneven, shaped by a hand rather than a machine, and the inner curve holds a trace of old tea perfume in the clay. You place the spoon beside it with care, not because anything would be lost if it were set down casually, but because gentleness suits this hour. The biscuit rests nearby, its butter scent growing softer as the warmer notes of tea gather around it. The kettle, with its pale chipped spout, has brought the whole room to this point. It would be easy to pour now, yet still you wait a little longer. The wait itself has become pleasant enough to continue. You stand by the window with the tea scent behind you and the nebula in front. Violet now lies in a broad, calm band across the middle of the glass, while above it a drift of pale rose opens like a petal. Farther out, silver light glimmers through thinner cloud. Nothing in that view suggests arrival or destination. The ship is simply passing through softness. The kettle at your back is simply nearing readiness. Both are enough. The low hum beneath the cabin floor has become so familiar that you can almost sort other quiets by it. There is the hum, steady and broad. There is the water's hidden stirring inside enamel. There is the near silence of steam collecting under the lid. There is the hush of wool and wood and paper all warmed together. Smell seems to belong to these quiets more than sight does. Cardamom comes on the hum. Orange lingers in the stillness near the sugar jar. Tea leaf deepens in the warmer air near the stove. Each part of the cabin has its own slow exhale. You return to the table and touch the kettle handle through the folded cloth. It is hot now, properly hot, and the heat has drawn out a fuller scent from the wrapped fabric. The cloth smells faintly of old starch, iron warmth, and one remembered evening after another. When you lift the kettle, the water within shifts with a subdued fullness. A little steam escapes near the lid and brushes your wrist with a warm, fragrant trace. You hold the kettle above the cup for just a moment, not yet tipping. Even the pause before pouring has its own complete shape. Then the water flows. It lands over the tea in a smooth, shining thread, and at once the fragrance blooms upward. Cardamom opens first, warm and rounded, almost floral at its edges. Orange peel follows, soft and sweet, carrying brightness without sharpness. The black tea grounds the whole rising cloud in something dark and comforting, like polished wood warmed by evening. Steam gathers above the cup and moves slowly toward the ceiling vent. You fill the cup nearly to the rim, stop, and set the kettle back on the stove with care. The chipped spout glistens with one clear drop before it disappears. The cabin changes the moment hot tea begins to steep. It is still the same room, still dim, still held in the low hum and violet light, but now the air has fullness. The scent reaches the blanket, the chair, the notebook on the table, the resin corner of the window frame, and folds them all into one quiet atmosphere. You place the lid over the cup to keep the heat in. Beneath it, the tea slowly deepens. Around it, the orange sugar jar sits uncorked, adding its faint sweetness to the steam. The wait has not ended. It has only changed form. Steeping has its own generous slowness. Nothing can be hurried without changing the tea into something else. So you wipe the spoon with the corner of the cloth and set it down again. You straighten the notebook, though it was already straight. You take the remaining biscuit from the plate and return the cloth over the empty spot. These are small movements, soft enough to blend into the room. The fragrance from the cup grows richer by the second, and the kettle remains warm on the stove, content to rest after doing what it came to do. Outside, the nebula seems to have drawn nearer. The windows are full of a close violet haze crossed with ribbons of rose that seem almost suspended just beyond the glass. Their light enters the cabin in layers, making the steam above the cup visible in wavering strands. The effect is gentle, almost like watching breath in winter, except the air here is warm and fragrant. Cardamom rises through rose light. Orange drifts through violet. Even the blue enamel of the kettle appears softer at the edges, as if the nebula had decided to be reflected in every object it could touch. When the tea has steeped long enough, you lift the lid, and a concentrated wave of scent rises into the quiet. It is richer now, more blended. Cardamom no longer stands apart from orange or tea leaf. The three have become one warm, fragrant body, deep and rounded and patient. You lift the infuser and rest it on the spoon. Dark amber gleams in the cup. A little steam slips upward and curls toward the vent. The kettle on the stove still gives off a gentle warmth, and even now its chipped spout seems to tilt toward the cup as if checking that all is well. You add a spoonful of the orange sugar. The crystals fall with a dry, bright hiss, too small to hear fully, but easy to imagine. As they dissolve, the surface of the tea shifts in smooth, dark circles. A sweeter fragrance rises for a moment and then settles into the cup's deeper warmth. You stir once, twice, slowly enough that the spoon only brushes the clay with a soft touch. Then you leave the tea alone. A drink this gentle asks for one more pause before the first sip. It asks to be looked at as if it were a small lamp set on the table. You carry the cup to the chair by the window and sit. The heat moves through the ceramic into your hands, steady and soothing in the plainest way. Steam passes before the glass, where violet and rose continue their long, unhurried drift. The first sip is warm, fragrant, and exactly what the whole room has been preparing for. Cardamom arrives softly. Orange follows. The tea itself lingers last, dark and smooth. Nothing about it is surprising. That is part of its pleasure. It tastes like the cabin has been smelling for the last quiet hour. The biscuit beside you breaks with only the gentlest resistance. Its butter scent lifts as soon as it opens, and for a moment the tea becomes richer by contrast. Crumbs rest on the small plate in a pattern too ordinary to notice unless the room is this calm. You take another sip and watch the rose clouds draw thinner lines across the lower window. The kettle remains on the stove, still warm enough to offer a second cup later if wanted. It is easy to think of that future cup and feel no need to hasten toward it. It belongs to the evening the way another violet cloud belongs to the glass. The cabin now smells lived in, not by effort, but by repetition of pleasant things. Tea has filled the air. Sugar has opened. The blanket has warmed more deeply. The notebook left on the table contributes its faint paper scent whenever a little steam drifts past. The wooden bowl with the orange waits in stillness, adding a low, bright note from its peel. And through all of it, the blue enamel kettle continues to hold the room together. Its cloth-wrapped handle, its pale chip near the spout, its memory of steam. It is the evening's truest object, small and sufficient. You stand once more and carry the cup to the table, where the notebook lies closed. When you touch the cover, it feels slightly warmer than before from the changed air. You open it to a blank page and trace the paper with one finger. There is no need to write. The page smells of dry fibers and a little dust, the sort of clean paper scent that becomes comforting only in a quiet place. The tea rests beside it, sending up cardamom and orange. The two scents meet without crowding each other. They simply settle in the same room and agree to remain. There is a drawer under the bunk where spare scarves are kept. When you open it, a faint scent of lavender cloth sachet rises, not enough to challenge the tea, only enough to brush past it like a violet thread. You choose a soft scarf the color of smoke and drape it over the chair back. Its woven wool smells of cedar from the drawer and a little starch from old washing. By the time you sit again, the scarf has already taken on a trace of cardamom from the air. Everything in the cabin seems willing to borrow a little from the cup. The nebula light shifts toward deeper tones now. The rose remains, but lower and more distant, while the violet grows richer and bluer. The cabin dims with it, though not enough to lose any shape. The stove gives off a muted glow below the kettle. The tea in the cup turns almost bronze where the last of the rose touches it. You take another sip and let the flavor linger. It tastes slightly sweeter now that the room has cooled by the smallest degree. The chipped spout of the kettle holds a dull gleam and then lets it go. Time in the drifting ship does not seem to pass in straight lines. It gathers in layers like scent in warm air or color in cloud. The moments before the kettle warmed still feel near. The opening of the tea tin feels near. The first bloom of steam feels near. They have not gone anywhere. They remain in the room as surely as the smell of cardamom remains in the cloth around the handle. You can taste the present cup and remember the waiting that came before it without any break between the two. It is all one long evening unfolding slowly in place. You pour a little more hot water from the kettle into the cup, not enough for a full second brewing, only enough to lengthen the warmth. The remaining tea in the leaves softens into this new pour with ease. The fragrance rises again, lighter now, but still full enough to round the room. Orange comes first this time, then cardamom, then the darker tea note behind both. The kettle is lighter in your hand after pouring, and when you set it back down, you hear only the faintest settling of water inside. It sounds like the smallest contentment. A soft reflection of your cup appears in the window now that the cabin has dimmed further. Beyond it, violet cloud moves in broad folds like velvet being drawn very slowly. The reflected steam drifts upward across that borrowed image, making it seem as though the nebula itself were exhaling tea. You lean closer to the glass, and the cool scent of the frame meets the warm fragrance rising from the cup. Resin from the rounded corner, cardamom from the steam, a trace of orange sugar from the spoon. The air at the window feels balanced between far space and near comfort. The second biscuit is still on the plate, though the evening would be complete without it. You decide to leave it for later. The choice pleases the room for no reason that can be explained. There is something restful in keeping one simple thing in reserve. It sits under its cloth on the plate, butter and flour waiting in quiet. Beside it, the orange remains whole in its bowl. Beside that, the sugar jar is still uncorked. Nothing has to be finished tonight. The kettle itself holds only enough hot water for perhaps one more small cup, and even that feels abundant. A row of tiny hooks near the door holds a coat, a satchel, and a scarf looped loosely over the last peg. The satchel smells faintly of leather and paper when you pass it. The coat gives off wool and the clean dryness of brushed fabric. These scents stay near the hooks, content in their corner. They do not wander across the room the way the tea does. Cardamom and orange seem made for drifting. They move with the soft current from the vent and settle again by the stove, then rise once more. The kettle, patient at the center, sends them on their small journeys. The cup is nearly half empty now, and the tea has cooled to that gentle middle warmth that often reveals more fragrance than the first hot sip. Cardamom feels rounder here. Orange becomes sweeter, almost candied. The black tea opens into a woody depth that was hidden before. You take your time with these slower flavors. The cabin supports such attention without requiring it. If you were to close your eyes, the low hum would remain, the cup would remain in your hands, and the scent would tell you exactly where you are. Blue enamel on the stove, violet and rose beyond the glass. warmth all around. You rise to light the small lamp above the table, not because the cabin needs it yet, but because evening on a ship drifting through colored cloud seems to welcome one more circle of dimness within dimness. The lamp clicks softly and glows behind frosted glass. Its metal collar warms quickly and adds the faint smell of heated brass to the air. That note is thin, but pleasing. It slips behind the tea and the kettle's warm enamel scent, giving them a firmer outline. The notebook cover catches the lamp glow. The chip in the kettle spout shines for a moment like a tiny crescent moon. With the lamp lit, the cabin feels even more self-contained. The windows now show darker violet with rose spread like thin paint at the edges. The ship's hum seems deeper, or perhaps simply more noticeable against the quiet around the lamp. You set the cup down and run one finger along the table grain. The wood smells slightly sweeter near the lamp warmth, almost like dried straw. The tea's fragrance still hangs nearby, and the kettle remains ready to offer a little more if wanted. There is no pressure in this readiness. It is enough that the possibility exists. You open the tin again just to smell it once more. The leaves inside have cooled since the last opening, and their fragrance is drier now, more concentrated. Cardamom is still immediate. Orange peel lies beneath it like a warm line of light behind a curtain. The black tea smells faintly malty and deep. You close the tin without taking more. The act is less about making another cup than about returning to the source of the scent that has slowly filled the evening. When the lid settles shut, the kettle seems to answer by releasing one small thread of steam from under its lid. A cloth hangs by the sink, and when you rinse the spoon and set it there to dry, the smell of clean water briefly joins the room. It is a plain scent, crisp and mineral, and it refreshes the air around the richer fragrance of tea. For a short while, the kettle's note of warmed water becomes easier to notice again beneath cardamom and orange. The cabin feels gently layered rather than full. Every smell has room. Every object has time. You dry your hands and return to the chair where the scarf still holds a faint trace of cedar and now also a hint of the tea steam. The ship passes into a paler region of cloud and the windows soften to lavender gray. This change is so mild that it feels more like a long exhale than a new scene. The lamp glow becomes slightly more important. The kettle's blue enamel appears deeper by contrast, almost midnight in color. Its pale, chipped edge now stands out clearly against the dim. You find yourself looking at that chip the way one might look at a familiar path in a garden. It is not beautiful because it is flawless. It is beautiful because the eye knows where to find it. Another small cup would be pleasant, so you pour one. This time the water is gentler, no longer near the first full heat. The tea it makes is lighter and the fragrance floats up in a more delicate form. Orange seems to lead more openly now. Cardamom follows like warmth in a sleeve. The cup fills only halfway, which somehow suits the late part of the evening. You add no sugar. You let the tea remain clear and mild. The kettle, growing emptier, feels lighter and more companionable, as if the evening's work has nearly been completed and it knows it. You carry this smaller cup to the bunk instead of the chair. Sitting at the edge, you feel the mattress give just a little under your weight. The blanket beside you smells of wool and cedar and the cabin's warm air. Steam rises from the tea and drifts toward the shelf above, where the cups and jar stand in orderly silhouettes. The view from here is lower, so the nebula fills more of the window with broad horizontal bands. Violet at the top, rose in the middle, silver beneath, thin as breath. The kettle remains visible beyond the cup, its chipped spout turned slightly toward the lamp. The scarf on the chair catches a little more of the tea's scent over time. So does the blanket. So do the pages of the notebook left open on the table. This gradual taking on of fragrance feels like another form of waiting, one that goes on quietly after the water has boiled and the tea has steeped. The cabin is being seasoned by the evening. Tomorrow, the cloth around the kettle handle may still remember cardamom. The sugar jar cork may still hold orange sweetness. The thought is comforting not because it promises anything, but because it lets this hour continue in traces. When you finish the second cup, you do not immediately stand. The empty cup remains warm in your hands, and that small leftover warmth has its own charm. The clay smells different now, more earthy than fragrant as the tea fades from it. Beyond the window, a thicker violet bloom slides across the silver and makes the cabin feel more private. The hum under the floor has not changed. It may be the same note it has always been. Yet in this later quiet, it sounds almost tender, simply because everything else has become softer around it. You set the empty cup beside the pillow and lie back for a while without pulling the blanket over you. From here, the lamp glow reaches only the lower part of the ceiling, leaving the upper corners in shadow so mild they barely count as shadow at all. The air near the bunk still carries tea and cardamom and the faint, warm metal scent from the stove. The kettle is visible if you turn your head slightly. Blue enamel, cloth-wrapped handle, pale chip near the spout. The object has become so familiar over the course of the evening that it feels almost like part of the ship itself. The pleasant thing you waited for has arrived, and yet the waiting has not really ended. It remains in the room as a softness in the pace of every movement. It remains in the way you leave the second biscuit untouched. It remains in the untaken notes of the notebook and the uncorked sugar jar and the possibility of one more sip if there happened to be enough tea left in the cup. The kettle on the stove, now mostly quiet and nearly empty, still seems to hold the shape of anticipation. It does not need to be fulfilled again to remain comforting. The nebula outside grows pale in one corner of the window, as if the cloud there has thinned to almost nothing. Through that clearing, a small cluster of distant stars glimmers faintly. They do not disturb the softness of the colored mist. They simply sit behind it, silver and calm. The sight adds no sharpness to the room. Instead, it seems to deepen the warmth inside by contrast. The cup, the blanket, the lamp, the stove, the kettle with its chipped spout and cloth handle. All of it becomes more intimate against that far, cool shimmer beyond the glass. You rise only to tidy the table in the gentlest way. The sugar jar is corked again. The spoon is set to dry. The notebook is closed and returned to its shelf. The tea tin goes back beside the cups. You leave the second biscuit under its cloth. Some small future pleasure is made from that simple decision, though there is no need to think of when. The kettle stays where it is on the stove, still faintly warm. A little of the evening's fragrance remains around it, and the cloth at its handle seems to hold the cardamom most of all. At last, the room asks for less movement and receives it. You turn the lamp lower until its glow becomes a small amber hush over the table. The windows now carry mostly violet, with rose appearing only in long, faded veils near the edges. The hum under the floor continues, broad and gentle as ever. The stove has gone from warmth to a softer after-warmth, enough to keep the kettle comfortable on its ring. The cabin smells of tea that has already been drunk, which is somehow different from tea still waiting in the cup. It is quieter, more woven into wool and wood. You fold the cloth from beside the stove and drape it over the kettle handle again. The gesture feels like settling a shawl around familiar shoulders. The cloth smells clearly now of warm enamel, steam, and cardamom. Orange lingers there too, but lighter, as if it had sunk deeper into the threads. The pale chip near the spout catches one last glint from the lamp. Then it becomes simply a shape your eye knows in the dim. You touch the kettle once with the back of your fingers. It is no longer hot, only pleasantly warm. That is enough. The bunk is ready without needing to be made ready. You pull the blanket up, and the wool releases one fuller breath of scent before settling. It smells clean and faintly cedar sweet, with a trace of tea in the fibers now. The pillow is cool on one side and warmer on the other, and the linen carries its light, dry fragrance of washed cloth and cabin air. From here, the table is a simple arrangement of silhouettes. Cup by the sink, sugar jar near the bowl, tea tin on the shelf, kettle centered on the stove, steady as a small blue moon. Outside, the nebula has become softer still. The colors no longer seem to pass the windows so much as remain there in slow suspension. Violet deepens and thins. Rose returns in a pale ribbon and fades. Silver gathers behind both and then slips away. There is no sign that anything will change soon, and this is pleasant. The ship drifts as if it has all the time such clouds could ask for. Inside, the fragrance of the evening loosens and spreads. Cardamom in the cloth, orange in the sugar jar, tea on the rim of the cup, warm metal resting under all of it. You leave the lamp low enough that the cabin keeps its corners. This dimness makes each familiar object simpler. The chair is only its curved back and one arm catching amber light. The shelf is only a narrow line above the bunk. The orange in the bowl is just a round, dusk-colored shape. The kettle is easiest to recognize. Even in near shadow, the spout and handle declare it at once. The chip near the spout gives it away completely. You could know this room by that little pale mark alone, and perhaps tonight you do. A late thread of steam no longer rises from the spout, yet the idea of steam seems to remain. It lingers in the scent around the stove, in the memory carried by the cloth handle, in the cup drying beside the sink. Smell has a way of making something gently present after it is gone from sight. The tea is finished. The water has cooled. The stirring inside the kettle is over. Yet cardamom still rests in the air, and orange still glows softly from the corked sugar jar. Because of that, the waiting and the pouring feel near, not past. You turn your face slightly toward the window and let the colored light shape the ceiling above. The low hum beneath the floor spreads through the mattress in a way too mild to call vibration. It is only the ship being itself. It joins the stillness of the blanket, the faint resin scent from the window frame, the wool soft smell near your shoulder, and the warm memory of tea lingering in the room. The kettle remains where it has remained all evening. It has done very little, really. Heated water, held scent, waited with you. Yet nothing else has anchored the night so completely. There is pleasure in knowing the cabin exactly as it is now. The orange left whole in the bowl, the second biscuit beneath its cloth, the notebook closed on the shelf, the scarf hanging over the chair, back with cedar and cardamom braided lightly into it, the spoon drying by the sink, the sugar jar sealed with its rind tucked inside, and the kettle, of course, blue enamel dark in the low light, handle wrapped, chipped spout faintly pale. These details do not ask to be remembered. They simply remain. And because they remain, the room feels calm and whole. The nebula slowly brightens once more, though only a little. A broad rose glow drifts up from below the window frame and gives the blanket's edge a blush of color before moving on. Then violet returns and smooths everything into deeper dusk. The change is so slow that the eye can accept it without effort. It is like scent growing or fading in warm air. Cardamom seems stronger for a while near the bunk, then orange becomes more noticeable, then warm wool, then the clean mineral trace near the sink. Nothing arrives sharply. Everything takes its time. If the kettle were to be used again, it would wait without complaint. If it were not used until another evening, that would suit it just as well. There is comfort in such objects, in things shaped entirely for one simple purpose and content to fulfill it slowly. The blue enamel has known warmth and cooling many times. The cloth handle has held steam and spice. The chipped spout has poured one cup after another. Tonight it has been enough to notice all this in the dim cabin while Violet and Rose drift by outside. More than enough, really. The room settles by degrees so slight they can only be felt in retrospect. The lamp seems lower, though it has not been touched. The blanket seems heavier, though it has not changed. The ship's hum seems farther away, though it remains beneath the floor exactly as before. Smell measures these changes better than sight. The bright part of the tea fragrance has softened. Cardamom now feels warm and deep, no longer lively at the edges. Orange is melted into wood and wool. The kettle's metal note is gentler, almost sweet. The cabin is becoming one blended evening scent. A little while later, you notice the window frame again. Warmth from the cabin has released a touch more resin from the repaired corner, and its amber note slips into the air above the bunk. It pairs so naturally with the softened cardamom that the two seem to have been waiting to meet in this later hour. Below them is the wool smell of the blanket. Beyond them is the faint, clean scent of glass. The kettle remains in the same place, quiet and present, as if it had called these layers together simply by keeping warm for long enough. You close your eyes for a moment and the room becomes even clearer. The hum under everything, the warm cloth scent of the blanket, the low sweet spice held in the kettle handle, orange folded into sugar and steam, a trace of tea on the cup, dry paper on the shelf, cedar in the drawer and near the pillow. Each smell holds still long enough to be known, then gives way to another without leaving. It feels less like a list than a single atmosphere with many depths. At the center of that atmosphere, unmistakable, is the little blue enamel kettle. When you open your eyes again, the lamp has made a small oval of gold on the table, and within that oval, the sugar jar glows faintly. The orange in the bowl is only a dark curve now. The chair has become a quiet shape by the window. The kettle, though dim, still gathers what light there is along its shoulder and spout. That pale chip remains the brightest point on it. Such a small imperfection, and yet it has guided the eye again and again all evening. It feels almost as if the room chose it for that purpose. Nothing more needs arranging. Nothing needs finishing. The second biscuit can remain where it is. The cup can finish drying by itself. The tea tin can wait unopened on the shelf. The ship can continue through violet cloud without any witness at the window. The kettle can cool slowly on the stove, holding the last trace of warmth in its base. All these unfinished things are peaceful because they do not tug at the mind. They simply belong to a world where one pleasant thing has already happened and another may happen later, or not. Either way is gentle. The nebula light turns from violet to a softer gray lilac, and for a few moments the cabin feels almost dawn-like, though there is no dawn here in any ordinary sense. The rose has retreated to a distant seam near the lower edge of the glass. Silver shows through in faint bands. Then the lilac deepens again, and the sense of quiet evening returns. Through all of it, the fragrance in the room continues to mellow. The tea no longer announces itself. It rests in fabric and clay and wood. The kettle keeps the strongest memory, especially at the wrapped handle. Your hand reaches from beneath the blanket to the edge of the bunk where the empty cup has been left. The clay is cool now. Only the faintest tea scent remains at the rim. You set it on the floor beside the bunk instead, and the small motion seems to complete something. The room can now be taken in without any object left needing a place. Table clear enough, shelf orderly, cup set down, kettle waiting. Outside, violet cloud passing. Inside, the last warm spice of cardamom and orange held lightly in the air as if the cabin were still exhaling them. The low hum beneath the floor becomes almost indistinguishable from silence now, not because it has faded, but because it has been accepted entirely. The same may be true of the scents in the room. They are no longer separate arrivals. They have settled into the background of the cabin's being. Warm wool, resin, dry paper, clay, orange and sugar, cardamom in cloth, tea leaf deepened by heat, blue enamel cooled after use. These are no longer events of the evening. They are simply what this drifting ship smells like after a kettle has taken its time and done its quiet work. You turn on your side and the blanket shifts with a soft, woolly hush. The pillow releases a little more cedar from the board beneath it, and this fresh, small layer folds easily into the rest. The lamp still glows low. The window still gathers violet. The kettle still sits where you can see it if you wish. There is comfort in that visible presence, in knowing the evening's anchor has not disappeared just because its task is done. It remains available to the eye the way its scent remains available to the air. A blue shape, a wrapped handle, a pale chip by the spout. Time passes in a way you no longer try to measure. It could be a few minutes or many. The nebula changes, but only softly. The lamp continues. The hum continues. The cabin cools by such slight degrees that the difference feels more like deepening than cooling. The fragrance around the stove draws closer to the kettle now, no longer spreading widely. The cloth around the handle keeps the cardamom nearest its folds. The orange has mostly withdrawn into the sugar jar. Tea lingers faintly at the sink. Everything is moving inward, settling back into itself. The thought of the first cup returns briefly, not as memory exactly, but as taste recalled through scent. Warm amber in the brown cup. Steam before the window. Cardamom first. Orange after. That soft, deep tea note last. The thought does not pull you away from the present. It simply drifts through like one more rose band passing the glass. Then it goes, leaving only the cabin as it is now. The kettle, the blanket, the dim lamp, the hum, the violet cloud. So much of a pleasant evening remains after the pleasant thing itself has passed. There is a tiny seam in the ceiling panel above the bunk, and from that seam comes the faint, clean scent of warmed paint. It has been there all evening, too slight to notice until now. In the late quiet, even this joins the layered comfort of the room. Nothing here is grand. Nothing needs to be. The sweetness of the evening has been built from things so small they would hardly deserve mention in a busier place. A cloth around a kettle handle, orange rind in sugar, a chipped spout, tea warming a cup, violet light moving like breath beyond the window. The lamp seems sleepier now, if a lamp can be sleepy. Its frosted shade glows the color of pale honey, and the brass collar beneath has cooled enough that its scent has almost disappeared. The stove gives off no new warmth. The cup by the sink is still. The sugar jar and tea tin remain quiet on the shelf. The chair by the window could be empty for 100 calm years and still appear only recently left. The kettle belongs to this stillness more than anything else. It has gone from promise to action to memory, and yet it remains simply itself. At the edge of the room, near the hooks by the door, the coat and satchel have long since released their scents back into the fabric and leather. The scarf over the chair keeps a faint trace of cedar and tea. The notebook on the shelf keeps its dry paper calm. The blanket keeps wool and cabin warmth. Smell has arranged the room into soft territories, all of them compatible, all of them gentle. You could wander through them in thought without ever leaving the bunk. And at the center of the map, unchanged, stands the little blue kettle with the pale chip at its spout. Outside, the rose returns one last time in a broad, sheer veil and drifts across the lower half of the window. It paints the underside of the shelf and the lip of the orange bowl, then reaches the stove and gives the kettle a tender glow. For a moment, the pale chip shines almost pink. Then the color thins and violet receives the cabin again. The change is so mild that it feels like being smiled at by the nebula and then left to rest. The kettle settles back into shadow, still easy to recognize. Nothing calls for words now, even inward ones. The room has become complete enough to simply hold. Warm air, though less warm than before. Tea fragrance, though fading. Cardamom in the cloth. Orange in the jar. Wool by the chin, resin near the window, the ship humming softly under it all, violet and rose beyond the glass, moving in clouds so slow they almost seem still. The kettle on the stove, blue enamel dark, handle wrapped, chipped spout, pale, all of it gathered into one calm shape around you. A little later, even the thought of the kettle loosens from being a thought and becomes only part of the room again. It no longer stands out as an object. It is simply there, as the window is there, as the shelf is there, as the low hum is there. Yet if the air shifts at all, the cardamom tucked into the cloth handle rises once more in a warm, faint thread, and at once the whole evening returns. The waiting, the pouring, the first steam, the cup by the window. Then the thread fades, and the room is just the room again. The ship continues through the nebula as steadily as ever. Cloud after cloud of violet and softened rose passes the windows without any need to be counted. Somewhere beyond them are distances too large to picture, but inside the cabin there is only this measured nearness. Bunk, table, chair, stove, shelf, window, kettle, a whole world made from a few patient things. The air has quieted into wool, paper, cedar, and the last gentle sweetness of tea. The blue enamel cools fully on its ring. The pale chip near the spout remains a tiny moon in the dim. And so the evening keeps its shape, not because it must be held, but because nothing in it wants to hurry away. The pleasant thing came slowly. It was enjoyed slowly. It faded slowly. Now the room itself rests in that same pace. The lamp low, the blanket warm, the hum beneath, violet and rose along the glass, the kettle cooling but still faintly fragrant at the handle. If one more cup is ever made here, another evening will gather around it in just this unhurried way. Tonight, though, it is enough that the kettle waits quietly where it is, and the ship drifts on,